It's been 41 years since the Mel Brooks comedy classic High Anxiety hit the movie theaters. Brooks wrote and he sang the lyrics to the title song Frank Sinatra style. I'm just going to read a few lines. High anxiety whenever you're near. High anxiety, it's you that I fear.
High anxiety, it's always the same. Anxiety, it's you that I blame.
It's very clear to me, I've got to give in. High anxiety, you win. Something like that anyway. God damn, they got drones here. Well, there are lots of ways to deal with anxiety, and my method is comedy. But everyone has their own approach, and that's why we need to talk. And today, Jeanne Wolfe, our host, will be talking to psychologist Jim Richardson, whose specialty is dealing with anxiety disorders.
Anxiety, a lot of people experience it and maybe comes in different forms. So I was hoping today we could kind of talk about what it is and how it's treated.
So I've been in practice maybe 32 years.
Yep.
And I would say it's probably our most common question or concern when people first call or come in for an appointment. And I think one of the things that people struggle with is, where does anxiety come from? Is it something I have in me, or is it something created by things around me?
Sure.
Probably both are true. You think of anxiety as something that's a persistent part of the human condition. So a lot of people spend time thinking they don't want to worry or they don't want to have anxiety. Very unrealistic way to start the discussion. So if you're human, you're anxious. And then you may have all different formats of anxiety, but for sure you're going to have anxiety, and it's going to come out in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, I think that's probably comforting
Yeah.
to a lot of people just to hear that. Like, it's normal.
Yeah.
It's not bad if you have it.
No,
It's
it's
normal.
If you don't
Yeah.
have it, that we'd say that's abnormal.
Okay.
And then we, as psychologists, go digging for it. We go, what do you mean you don't have anxiety? Everybody has anxiety. Does that come in the form of, I'm shy, I'm quiet? Do I have a temper outburst? Do I cry? Do I feel self-conscious about myself? Do I have an upset stomach? All sorts of different ways it manifests for people and families.
So where do you think it probably comes from?
Well, I think,
When you kind of said those two.
yep, I would say foremost it is. It's just a process that we have in us. And then depending on your background, both from your family histories, life experiences, I think it can get magnified and take on different directions. And then a lot of times people can't pin place. So let's say a person all of a sudden has a fear of heights that comes up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Or a dreaded fear that I'm going to throw up. If I'm a child in school, I'm going to first grade, real common to have. Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Not always a specific place. And I think people rack their brains and actually start sometimes obsessing on their anxiety, which a lot of times recreates the symptoms and intensifies them. So one of the first approaches we try and take is, hey, we all have this, and we try and normalize it and try and make it something that, like, we seek to understand it, but probably not like we're going to fix it and like just make it all go away.
You kind of mentioned, like, you started with kids going to school feeling like they're going to throw up. It sort of becomes, I'm going to throw up. Can you kind of talk about other ways that that anxiety can manifest, maybe in kids and or adults?
Kids are particularly susceptible, right, because they're vulnerable and are looking, as part of being a child, to be taken care of. And so anytime they go through changes, whether that's I'm going into a new daycare, I'm starting kindergarten, I'm moving into first grade, any change elements would be a source where kids start to feel different, and they might not actually have the words to say, I'm anxious. They might say, my head feels funny, or my tummy hurts. They might give you signals like that. Or you might see your child who's been kind of calm and pleasant and happy all the time. All of a sudden they have a temper burst, or they're crying over little things. And then as a parent, you go into this quick reaction, because one of our parent needs is to have our kids in comfort. And I think we start moving quite quickly to try and get them back in balance, in part
Sure.
for the child, but a lot of that has to do with being a parent and wanting to be comfortable yourself. So,
Right. Feeling like I'm doing a good enough job.
and I want this unhappiness to go away, because for parents, and most parents would say this, it's one of the first times in your life after you have a child that you start to think and care about another human being more than yourself. And so their comfort becomes primary to a sense of your well-being. And
Sure.
in anxiety cases, that can be kind of extreme. And so child gets anxious, parents gets anxious, and then all of a sudden it starts to walk up the stairs and you have anxiety squared, and pretty soon the whole
Right.
household is anxious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's sort of running the show.
Can start to control lots of movements.
Yeah. How would a parent spot that in their kids? How might they differentiate from they're just having a bad day to
Yeah.
"Oh, my kid might really be struggling
Right.
with severe anxiety, or anxiety that's a problem."
I think the idea of mostly it's normal, but then it starts to creep outside of normal when. And I think the when part for a parent is the frequency of the symptoms or the side effects, the intensity starts to magnify. And then, say I'm afraid of monsters under my bed. Well, parents will go, I'll get the monster spray and then we'll imaginary take that away. Child is relieved, and then guess what happens the next night before bed? Doesn't happen at 7 in the morning, it happens at 7 at night or 8 at night.
Sure.
And then that routine starts. So you'll start to see symptoms there. But like for kids as they're approaching school, you might start to see them refuse to put on their clothes or get delayed in getting out of bed for school.
Yeah.
Or the first thing when they wake up, they start to make a negative comment, or they start to say they're not
Yeah.
feeling well. So school avoidance anxiety is a real common thing for parents to encounter.
And when you talk about like that, the monster spray, and some of those,
We all need monster
we all-
spray sometimes for
Right.
all parts of our life that makes us anxious.
all
So
sorts of different, yeah.
you can imagine how many adults will want to go to work and go, you make
Yeah.
me anxious, all
Yeah.
better now. So,
Yeah, Bob spray. Like
Yeah.
we're just gonna like surround my desk. He can't come and
Yeah.
make me anxious. When are those things helpful, and when can they be harmful, or kind of perpetuate that sense of I can't do it? Because I've heard of some stories where kids don't want to get on the bus, they don't want to go to school, their tummy hurts. I've heard of one parent that got Tic Tacs and took the label off and said, here's your worry pill for your tummy.
Yeah.
And gave it to the kid right before they got on the bus.
Yeah.
And the kid went on the bus
Yeah.
and all was fine, and it never,
And then now we need to work with that parent on what they.
but that never,
I had my kid believing they were taking medications when they weren't. Yeah.
yeah,
But it worked.
but it worked.
Yeah. So the
So
kind
how-
of the placebo effect of
Yeah,
that.
right.
So as you start into anything, whether it's anxiety or ADD or depression, one of the things is it starts to impact your daily functioning. Anxiety says, hey, this is not good here. Like, I need help. And for kids, their first line of help often is the adult. And what better way to feel heroic, nurturant, and like you really did something? Your kid says, hey, I'm afraid of this, whether it's a bug, a germ, going to school, somebody at school says something they don't like about my dress or about my clothing, and the parent goes into immediate action or reaction to
Okay.
try and quell that anxiety. Child receives nurturance, empathy, which is generally really good,
Right.
and then reassurance. And so what we like to measure is, does a reasonable amount of reassurance start to take that anxiety down the stairs? So instead of feeling like it's an 8, 9, 10, I got anxiety back down into the 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 range. So the problem is, once kids start to receive that feeling of nurturance, they're receiving it in combination with feeling overwhelmed or feeling like they can't do something. So pretty soon they get reinforced for the
Okay.
feelings of anxiety that call in the nurturance, and it actually can start to go backwards. So as a parent, you have to be like very wise in assessing, like, is my intervention working, or is the frequency increasing? And then can I say no? Can I like make my kid resilient? And like, I think the primary goal has to be the determination is my son or daughter safe. Anxiety is saying to us, you're not safe, you're not okay. As parents, number one thing, we want our kids to feel safe and okay.
Right.
So when my kid says, I don't feel good, and yet I think as a parent, I know that's anxiety, but we say, I know my kid's okay, but we take them to the doctor. And in the process of taking them to the doctor, there's lots of time spent. A lot of times the doctor here have a sucker, everybody seems to feel better, and then all of a sudden, you know what? That stomach aches back the next day and it doesn't go away. Now it's showing up at school. The child leaves class, goes to the nurse, and you start that cycle. When do I get to say as a parent, I'm going to not nurture this. I'm actually going to build resilience, a different skill. It's not happiness, but resilience is critical in dealing with anxiety.
So let's talk about school anxiety. What would be a way that a parent would address anxiety around school or homework?
Yeah,
with
great question. I think the way society has moved, the pressure that kids are feeling and parents are feeling to get their kids on track and doing extremely well starts very early. And so we're seeing pressure in kindergarten for kids to be reading, writing, and doing things that if you look back 20 or 30 years, that pressure wasn't there. And so parents are having to deal with more. Kids are coming home with more. So kids come home with this pressure, and then at home, say by 3, 4, 5 o'clock, that kid's been in school all day, and then some kids can't tolerate that, right? They're fatigued, and they don't have anything more. And then the whole process of reading or doing a math problem becomes anxiety producing. The first step for parents is not to panic when your kid bucks with tears or whining, right? What you'd want to do is reset them and kind of promote the idea that, hey, it's okay that you feel overwhelmed. Like empathize and reassure would be the starting point there. A lot of times kids, though, don't want to be doing their homework. Anxiety says fight or flight, right? Anxiety's giving us a signal that something doesn't feel right in us, and we have to make an adjustment. And so for the young child, it might be as little as, I don't want to be sitting here at the table doing math. I want to go watch a TV program, play a computer game, play with toys. So the parent has to make sure that their first step out isn't too strong, too harsh, too rigid. They want to just embrace the idea that, hey, that's okay, we're going to be okay, and it's okay that you're feeling stressed. And then that kid might come back at it with, I can't do this. It might be crying, it might be resistance, right? For parents to kind of remain calm and reasonable. As parents elevate, the kid has to come over that elevation to kind of prove themselves further. So, and then as parents elevate, they become less credible. The more panicked they sound, the more panicked the kid's likely to become. And so the kid's either going to go deeper into fight, which is going to get louder and prouder, or the kid's going to start to pull back deeper and get shy and withdrawn as part of their coping strategy in that. So parents sometimes have to breathe through that. Give it a minute.
Write it out.
Write it out. And then always the question is my son or daughter safe? The answer is yes. You know, then we can proceed and there's nothing to panic about. Is my son or daughter capable of meeting their request in front of them? Because sometimes kids get anxious when they don't feel they're capable. And so you have to know, you know, I can't give my 5-year-old an algebra trig problem and then be yelling at them that they're being lazy or avoidant. Right. I have to make sure their capabilities matching the situation. And so as long as that's in place, you go forward. And then it's really important that the kid does not necessarily escape because of the anxiety at that point. But what I say, they get to stay and reason through it. Because if at that juncture, after you've been reasoning, that kid gets to break out into a pleasurable activity, they learn, oh, I have to go this long, I have to get this loud, I have to get this stubborn with my anxiety, and then I'll get the thing I want.
Which is to not maybe do that thing that's anxiety producing. I get to avoid this and do the fun stuff.
And that's really hard for parents because they're seeing their kid get upset. And then I would say for moms in particular, super hard because as a mom, I feel like I'm causing my kid pain.
Yeah.
I'm frustrating them. I'm being a bad person versus I'm building resiliency.
If a parent finds themselves in a situation like that, how do they know when to maybe ask for more help, and then where do they go? What would be a good first step?
Yep. So our first step is we like to normalize and we like to promote resiliency. That doesn't always work. Okay. And then families aren't all the same, so you have all sorts of different stressors.
Yeah.
One of the signals would be, hey, this is sustaining and even gaining speed. And so the intensity is staying the same, frequency is staying the same. And so parents start to question themselves. Moms and dads have very different approaches. Anxiety runs right through those different approaches and can really get parents pinwheeling with anxiety, frustration, crossfire where they bicker with each other, all those. And so the family literally starts to tumble with anxiety. And it's all normal, right? But it gets to the point where our nights aren't going well.
Yeah.
So I tell people one of the first places that you can get really sound advice is talk to your school counselor, talk to a school psychologist, talk to even the teacher at school that's working with your child. One of the things that parents sometimes do is they kind of circle the wagons, and sometimes they're embarrassed or don't want information out. There's a lot of pressure that my kid's perfect, and if my kid's having a problem, I'm doing something wrong as a parent. Okay, so reaching out is a big issue. So talking to a school person is really a good idea. The other place is family docs and pediatricians. Probably one of the number one non-physical things that they deal with is the mental health condition of anxiety. And they have resources. They have people in the community that they trust that have assessment and counseling tools. They have tools in their office. And then I'm going to say, the less frequent and probably more intense cases where people need consultation for medication management, your pediatrician's a really good starting place. And then they can get you rolling with some exploration of medications. That's a big step for parents. I've never met one parent in all my time where they sit down in the office and we're talking about anxiety or depression or ADD. And I say, so what do you think about medications? Not one parent ever has said, great, let's go for it. Their first feeling is, whoa, that sounds extreme. It sounds extreme, but really there's a place for medications, and it really can be helpful to quiet down that brain that is really activated and won't settle down. The thoughts keep coming, the feelings keep surging. So it's worth a conversation. And most of the pediatricians and family docs aren't like gangbusters to give medications. They're conservative and cautious. They practice with kids and families. They want things to go well. And they have a pretty good indication from their case histories where this might go and what that child might need. So
some of those kids, maybe despite all the parents' best efforts and appropriate responses and appropriate interventions, they might just have a biology.
There are kids
just need that extra
whether we call
support.
it biology or it's something so learned it's ingrained, I don't think we're ever getting the thermometer in there with our best brain scans, with our best diagnostics. We're always going to have a little bit of mystery of, is this behavioral? Is this learned? Is this genetic? It's there.
Families with mental health issues. There's a lot of different people in a family, kids, adults. How does one go about sorting that all out and figuring out how maybe they're impacting one another and how they need to be treated differently?
Yeah, that's a good question, because a lot of times we start with the child. Most frequently somebody will say, my child, my son, my daughter. A teacher will say there's a problem. Somebody in the neighborhood says your son did this. It starts the ball rolling and parents come in. I think skilled practitioners have to take a holistic approach. And so we start with the symptoms, the signs, what's going on right now, and get background. So we do a real thorough developmental history. But then as part of that, you want to understand the family. You want to know mom's history, dad's history. Are there anything going on now that might be contributory to this? And a lot of times that's where the adult discussion of, they don't like to bring it in as mental health, but how you communicate, how you deal with your emotions might be part of this. And then we'll start a discussion with the parents at that point. So it'd be rare that I would just see a son or a daughter without bringing the parents in and starting to make them a participant in the treatment plan, as opposed to it's just my son or daughter's problem. It's our problem, and so we all play a part in that. I think that's a more helpful way for people to deal with stress. There are times when we're working with children, though, where you can tell a parent might be undergoing change or stress of their own. Families go through a lot of change. There could be a grief process going on. You lose a parent. It could be a divorce situation where there's marriage turmoil. And then, believe it or not, adults have their own mental health issues. And a lot of times they're not being addressed. It's pretty common for those to be shared within the family system. So if I am under a lot of pressure as a dad and I'm losing my temper a lot, or I find myself drinking a lot, it's not a direct statement to the kid, but at some point or another, the anxiety may tip over there and my son or daughter starts acting differently, and that gets noticed at school. So not uncommon for us to make recommendations sometimes that a mom or a dad or even a couple go in and start to look at their communication, look at their own mental health and how that might start being impacting to the child, but just to the family system, and then for themselves. It's a really difficult discussion because I think somewhere between calling a psychologist or a proctologist, people don't want to do that. That's not a thing of like pride. Hey, I called the psychologist.
Yeah.
More often than not, right, men tend to be really adverse and hesitant to go in and say, hey, I want to talk about this, or I might need some help here. But my experience has been the men are hesitant. Once they come in, they feel pretty comfortable. And I think as long as the practitioners do a good job of making it more normal than clinical, to get a conversation going. So I really encourage parents to look at that, because we all have our own family histories of anxiety. My dad, my grandfather, my mother, my grandmother, my brothers, my sisters, we all have something going on, and it wouldn't be uncommon for us to get out of balance. And then sometimes we discover through our kids' anxiety, wow, I remember now when I was 10 or when I was 15, like I've been carrying this anxiety around a long time, or depression. And so they start to put that together. So,
And I think that can help them relate to their kids. 'Cause
yeah,
I've
well,
seen
it
that
makes the
sometimes-
kids real. The kids feel like, oh, there's my parent. If it's okay for my parent, it's okay for me. You know, if dad's willing to go talk to somebody and open up or share something, well, that's a really positive modeling that parents can do. It's hard having kids. And so you might have a situation where mom and dad are in a great relationship. Child number one comes, child number two, and then you start to throw in some curveballs, and all of a sudden the marital stress starts to go up. That's a situation where what came first, the chicken or the egg? And so parents really don't know how to do that. We don't give you a user manual on the altar and go, okay, by the way, 10 years from now when this is going to happen. It's probably one of the worst educational areas of society, is just how do we manage mental health and how do we function constructively as a family. I think the other thing that's really relevant is the amount of family change that's went on in the past 20 to 30 years. So currently our divorce rate is over 50%, which means there's custody back and forth, and there's a lot more single parenting going on. I don't think there's anything harder than being a single parent. And I think that burden a lot of times falls unduly on the mom. And so to maintain a job, to do single parenting, to have 2 or 3 kids, and then have a kid that fires up with anxiety or anger management issues, you can imagine how overwhelming that gets. And then how do I find the time to take care of myself in that? I think really, really common, really important to do. And sometimes we have to swallow our pride and just trust there are people out there that want to help and give you good advice and like give you the nurturance and the skills that you need.
You put your own mask on before you put your kid's mask on, right?
Yeah.
They say that on the plane, and I think that's true. It's that self-care.
Yeah.
Everybody else comes first before me. How can parents learn to not be afraid of their child's anxiety and try to fix it? What are a couple of strategies you might have?
Yeah. I think the first thing I like parents to do is breathe.
Just
It's
breathe.
like I want you to think as a parent, my job isn't to keep my child in comfort. My child's not going to learn as much and they're not going to be as resilient. Anxiety isn't bad. Anxiety is, and we have to learn how to manage it. And so, people panic over anxiety because their kids panic and they're really putting a lot of pressure on people. We learn a lot. There's meaning in suffering, provided the suffering isn't forever and so intense and unbearable. Suffering's regular. Anxiety is a form of suffering. It's a signal to us. It's our brain's way of saying, hey, I have to pay attention to something. And so if parents start off, take a breath, don't panic, and then this is a learning experience. This is actually something that will help my child later on as they go through. It strengthens them, makes them more resilient, not less. Makes them more flexible. We have to be careful about the rigidity of anxiety, because anxiety has rules. Anxiety's intense and it screams at us. So we have to just take a breath, take a step back and say this is all part of the parenting process.
So it's really reframing
Yeah, very
anxiety
much so.
and just looking at it from through a whole different lens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just changing that perspective that this isn't a bad thing. This is a normal thing. It can be a scary thing, but people go to scary movies. They pay a lot of money to go to scary movies. So scary isn't always bad. It's temporary. And then there are things, right, that might be going on that you really do need attention for. So if my kid's having panic attacks and in fact there's a divorce going on, or there's alcohol abuse in the family, or there's domestic abuse going on, I welcome that anxiety. It signals, hey, it's a survival tool for us. It's built into us. And then it's okay as a parent to think, now what do I do? And then for parents, I think the ability to reach out and get an opinion, get an educated or an experienced opinion. We all talk to our friends. We all talk to people off the street. We talk to people on the line at Starbucks or Kowalski's. I think sometimes just making that phone call and saying, hey, I just wanted to bounce this off of you. People want to help. Social workers want to help. School counselors want to help. Psychologists want to help. Pediatricians want to help. Teachers want to help. Just checking in can get you to a resource that's life-changing, and it'll give you tools, gives your child tools, and you're on your way.
Yeah. That's great. This is all really great information.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
Yeah.
We Need to Talk, brought to you by the St. Louis Park Mental Health Action Committee and the folks from Southwest Community TV, from Hopkins, Eden Prairie, and Minnetonka. We Need to Talk. In future episodes, we'll be discussing just about anything related to our mental health as we seek to raise awareness and suggest pathways to healing. But no matter what the issues, the first step is always acknowledging the problems and understanding that help is available.